rise of unchecked business magnates and a laissez-faire capitalist system that drove the common man down became a problem of great magnitude during the Gilded Age. While the rise of big business in this time period threatened the well-being of the common man, it also brought about an age of industrialization that the U.S. greatly needed to become the superpower it is today. Politics, for the most part, was guided greatly by conservative laissez-faire frame of government inspired by Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, a book the framers of the Constitution had read and used as a source of rebellion toward the British Empire. Additionally, the court case Wabash v. Illinois restricted the ability of state governments to restrict the power of railroad corporations that abuse the mass public. But before one can truly understand the rise of corporate magnates, he or she must first understand each type of business organization and why they gave unfair influence. Monopoly, the exclusive possession of the supply of a commodity or service. Conglomerate, a large corporation formed by the merging of separate and diverse firms. Pool, a temporary affiliation of two or more people formed for the purpose of attempting to manipulate a security's price and/or volume. The pool is necessary in order to acquire the capital needed to manipulate a stock having a large market value. Pools were especially popular in the 1920s and early 1930s, but now have been regulated out of existence. Trust, a large company that has or attempts to gain monopolistic control of a market. Holding company, a company created to buy and own the shares of other companies, which it then controls. The lack of regulation by the federal government continued for the most part until Congress passed the Sherman Antitrust Act and the Interstate Commerce Act. The ICA was a comprehensive piece of legislation that held that it shall be unlawful for any common carrier subject to the provisions of this act to make or give any undue or unreasonable preference or advantage to any particular person, company, firm, corporation, or locality, in any respect whatsoever. Additionally, railroad companies could not overcharge their passengers. Although it had many holes, it provided precedents for Congress regulating businesses and was an important first step. The Sherman Antitrust Act held that every person who shall monopolize or attempt to monopolize or combine or conspire with any person or persons to monopolize any part of the trade or commerce among the several states or with foreign nations shall be deemed guilty of a felony. While this too was also a meaningful step, it was hard to enforce and ultimately failed until about 1914. The clear distinction for this time period, however, comes from the rise of a few ultra-wealthy magnates. For example, these would include Andrew Carnegie, John Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan, Jay Gould, Cornelius Vanderbilt, and Henry Ford, who were all entrepreneurs who made millions of dollars from lax regulation standards. Depending on one's view of history, he or she would view these important figures as robber barons or captains of industry. Andrew Carnegie was a Scottish-American who went from rags to riches as a teenager. He's famously known for practicing vertical integration over the steel market by mass-producing steel using the Bessemer process by controlling every aspect of production without a middleman. He is also widely credited with the Gospel of Wealth, a product of social Darwinism that he stated that the superior members of society are given the wealth of a society so they can responsibly care for their brethren who are not capable of understanding how to care for themselves. Carnegie was heavily against conspicuous consumption, in which wealthy members of society use their wealth to show their high status. He believed it was wasteful, provided no societal benefit, and above all was an abuse of power. In his later years before retirement, he sold his steel company to J.P. Morgan for $450 million. However, feeling ashamed of this large sum of money, he began donating it away for philanthropic causes such as funding for public libraries. J.P. Morgan was a financier who was credited with two major accomplishments. First, he prevented the collapse of the federal treasuries by loaning the government 3.5 million ounces of gold, and second, he saved the country from the Panic of 1907. He was also a proponent of the plan to establish a Federal Reserve System, and after delving into the steel business, he bought out Andrew Carnegie's company. John D. Rockefeller was an oil magnate who created the company Standard Oil, or as he saw it, the American Beauty Rose. He practiced horizontal integration in which he partnered up with other companies from other sectors that he was dependent on for transporting his oil. By using horizontal integration, he wiped out other seedling companies to protect his own. After accounting for inflation, he is regarded as the wealthiest man to ever live. However, while he was cruel in business, he was highly philanthropic as well, and his charitable foundations pioneered development in medicine and research and were key for discovering ways to eradicate the yellow fever. Jay Gould was a railroad developer and spectator who oversaw the Union Pacific Railroad Company when it was constructing the Transcontinental Railroad. During his time at Union Pacific, he was responsible for swindling millions of dollars from the U.S. government through corrupt business practices in which he overcharged the government. Cornelius Vanderbilt was a multimillionaire who made his fortune through shipping and railroads. He also served on the board of several rail companies, including the New York, Harlem, New York Central, and Hudson River Railroads. He also ran a steamship company to Nicaragua called the Accessory Transit Company and heavily donated to the college which now bears his name, Vanderbilt University. Henry Ford was the founder of the Ford Motor Company and is accredited with creating the Model T car, which was widely available to a large section of Americans because of its low cost of production. He was able to keep prices low and increase accessibility to his car by using an assembly line produced this car.
With the mass immigration from the Northwest and Southeast Europe, many unskilled laborers found job opportunities in rapidly urbanizing cities. These industrial jobs provided jobs for new immigrants, and there were many cheap housing opportunities. Not only did cities see growth in European immigrants, but also African Americans who avoid the abusive Jim Crow laws. Moreover, many farmers abandoned the failing agricultural business and diverted to the north to work manufacturing jobs. With this influx of people to cities in the north, cities had to develop technology, improve transportation and housing conditions. Electric trolley cars were prominent during the time period, and we also saw large intercontinental railroads continually being built to accommodate the growing population. Also, subway systems were implemented in large cities to help facilitate mass transit in these cities. With the highly populated housing market, companies began to develop new sanitation standards to keep the people healthy and productive. We saw an increase in filtration and chlorination to keep the water free from bacteria. Even the overall plumbing systems were improved. To divert the sewage from households, sewage lines were improved, and sanitation plants were created. Improved electrical systems were implemented, and we saw inventions like elevators and suspension bridges being built during urbanization. Urbanization also caused numerous problems during the Gilded Age, especially with worker conditions and income disparities that would stricken the lower class quality of life. The worker conditions for factory workers were terrible. Laborers worked long hours, gained little pay, and risked chance of injury while using unsafe machines. Sweatshops were prominent during the time, and there were no restrictions on child labor laws, so many families employed their child to try to combat the immense poverty. Pollution also ensued as factories dumped mass amounts of excess sewage and CO2 levels into the atmosphere. Workers also breathed these fumes in throughout the day, which would put them at serious risk for diseases like black lung and other airborne diseases. Many worked in close proximity, so if one worker were to get sick, then a majority would fall into illness as well. Moreover, the terrible living conditions of tenement houses created terrible living conditions for poor manufacturing workers. These houses were overcrowded, had no ventilation, were very dark, and had terrible plumbing systems. These primitive plumbing systems would contaminate drinking water, and there was no access to clean drinking water for many families. Many philosophies developed during the urbanization during the Golden Age as well. The theory of social Darwinism was constantly quoted by rich entrepreneurs and only served to suppress the lower class. The belief was that the rich were meant to be wealthy, and they were specifically naturally selected to lead society. Although many saw the logical fallacies in the theory, many poor societies saw it as a deterrent to fully accomplishing the American dream. The Puritan work ethic was another important philosophy during this time period. The philosophy was that people were predestined to be successful in society, and that two of the signs were Protestants who constantly labored. This inspired the Protestant society, and to point the Catholic society to labor harder to be considered to be one of the elect. Although these philosophies were never concrete beliefs in society, they did affect people's mindsets on the position of wealth distribution.
From 1870 to 1890, industry really began to take shape in what is known as the Gilded Age. Many inventions were made, along with new ways to use natural resources such as coal, oil, and iron. Innovation during the Gilded Age changed America and made life better and easier for all those who inhabited the United States. Industry first became big in the United States during the Industrial Revolution, a time where textile mills became very popular and useful to producing all kinds of goods. The Industrial Revolution also brought about canals that were both used for traveling and water power. Cross-continental railroads, like Cumberland Road, were also built to help transport manufactured goods. New uses of natural resources were also found during the Gilded Age. Iron was initially used to build railroads, but it would often bend and twist, causing danger to the train's passengers. Steel was much stronger and would not bend under the weight of the trains. Coal was used to fuel the trains that ran on these railroads, as well as boats and manufacturing machinery. Oil was used to power steamships and was also used in any product that used electricity, such as lamps. Some cars were powered by oil, but this was very rare. One of the most significant events of the Gilded Age was the building of a transcontinental railroad. The railroad was used to transport goods across the country faster than they ever could before. Also, the Transcontinental Railroad allowed Americans to travel to the West and start a new life. Many farmers who had used up their land in the South wished to move west in search of a new land, and the Transcontinental Railroad provided them this opportunity. The Gilded Age was filled with all kinds of inventions, but some of the most important were the inventions of Samuel B. Morse, Henry Bessemer, Alexander Graham Bell, and Thomas Alva Edison. Samuel B. Morse invented the telegraph and thus greatly improved the speed of communication. Newspapers could now get news within minutes compared to days it previously took. Henry Bessemer changed the business of railroad building with his discovery that if air was blown through iron, steel would be created. William Kelly was the first to discover this method, but Bessemer was the first to patent it. Steel was used to build railroads and also skyscrapers. Alexander Graham Bell was the inventor of the telephone and allowed for people to communicate with one another without having to travel long distances or leave the comfort of their house. Thomas Alva Edison created the light bulb in 1879 and changed the world forever. His light bulb gave power to the nation and allowed people's homes to get light by the power of electricity rather than candlelight. Now people could carry out tasks once the sun had gone down, which they previously could not.